tensions reaching a boiling point in Cuba. Hundreds of people participated Sunday in a rare public protest amid a worsening economic crisis that has left everyday Cubans without enough food, electricity or medication. Cuban-run TV showing people flooding the streets of the island's second largest city, Santiago de Cuba. Demonstrators seen chanting for electricity and food, as some Cubans have experienced power outages for more than 18 hours a day.
I think there are three crises going on at the same time, an economic crisis, a social crisis, and now a political crisis. Of course, the most important and the most difficult to solve is the economic one.
After the protest, Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel taking to social media saying, quote, mediocre politicians and terrorists on social media lined up from South Florida to fire up the streets of Cuba. The US Embassy in Havana urging Cuba's government to respect the human rights of the protesters and address the legitimate needs of the Cuban people. But today, in response to the embassy, Cuba's foreign ministry announcing it had summoned the top US diplomat in Havana, accusing the embassy of interfering in the nation's internal affairs. The US has sanctioned Cuba for more than 60 years, but in recent years they've been ratcheted up even more. President Biden has stuck with so-called maximum pressure sanctions that were imposed on this island during the Trump administration. Economists say they cost Cuba billions of dollars a year. Now, coupled with a moribund planned economy, they've created a cash crunch. Today, Cubans struggle with increasing shortages in food, medicine, fuel and power. Inflation has risen sharply, making many products unaffordable for Cubans who depend on an average monthly state salary, the equivalent of just $16. Earlier this month, gasoline price hikes also went into effect, in some cases raising gas prices about 500%.
Esto que está haciendo el país está montado sobre la inflación, no puede ser real, señores.
In another rare move, Cuba has asked the UN World Food Programme for assistance, requesting powdered milk for young children. All this while the Cuban peso has plummeted.
Inflation has really gone crazy over the last couple of years, to the point where if your salary is entirely in Cuban pesos, its value has deteriorated about 90% compared to the US dollar in just the last 2 years.
Demand has spiked for the US dollar, leaving Cubans with limited options to live out their daily lives.
Pueblo no tiene cómo responder si no sabemos, estamos por eso es que existe el mercado negro acerca del dólar, porque no se ha tomado una medida.
Drastic measures in the face of uncertainty.
Younger Cubans have sort of lost hope in the possibility that it's going to get better anytime soon.
And Ed Augustine joins us now from Havana, Cuba. Ed, you're there on the ground. Walk us through what the reality is like in Cuba with these power outages.
These power outages have been a reality for millions of Cubans for years now. I'm broadcasting and I'm speaking to you from Havana, where there are approximately 2 million people. That's only about a fifth of the population of Cuba. 4/5 of the Cuban population lives in the provinces. And we're far more insulated in Havana. So sometimes the power goes in my house. You know, I had a power cut for about an hour yesterday. It's annoying, but it's not a game changer. In the provinces, millions of people have been living for months with power outages that can stretch sometimes 12, sometimes 18 hours. I spoke to a source yesterday who lives in the westerly province of Pinar del Rio in a small village. He said that he had less than 2 hours of power yesterday. Just imagine getting back to your house after a day at work with no light and seeing the small amount of food you have for you and your family slowly going off in the fridge because there's not even enough power to keep it refrigerated. It's a very tense, difficult situation for people.
And Ed, the United States has responded to the allegations from Havana that they've intervened with international affairs, right? What are they saying?
Well, the Cuban allegation in general, when they talk about US, what they'd say interference or meddling, is that the sanctions are of themselves a way of creating misery in Cuba. You know, that by reducing the amount of money that the Cuban government has to spend on things like food to feed people and petrol to keep the power on, they are creating the context for these protests and general popular discontent. The US government rejects that. The State Department today said that the accusation that that the United States government was behind the protests was, quote, absurd, and has roundly rejected the the allegation.
Ed Augustine, thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.